Welcome to the President's Podcast right here on the record with the Ohio Senate. The views the news excludes. I'm your host, John Fortney. I'm the Director of Communication for the Republican Caucus in the Senate, the Majority Caucus. Great to have back on the President's Podcast, Ohio Senate President Matt Huffman, Republican from Lima, Ohio. Good to see you.
You too, John. How you doing?
Doing very well. Busy week at the Ohio Statehouse, even though there was no session this week. Very important event in the Rotunda, and it's something that is reserved really only for very special public servants in the state, whether it's been a governor or the state lawmaker. The longest-serving Ohio Senator Ted Gray lied in state this week at the Rotunda, and you and two of your colleagues from the Democrat side of the aisle, Herschel Craig and Bill DeMora, both joined you in a tribute to Ted Gray and his family.
Ted Gray was a senator who originally was elected in Piqua, Ohio, and in 1951, and served 43 years in the Ohio Senate. Ultimately, his district included Worthington, and that was, during those times, he obviously had an effect on a lot of people. I heard stories today from Governor Mike DeWine and Governor Kasich, who both served in the Senate with Ted Gray, as did a lot of other people. I was fortunate to be able to meet Ted just one time. About a year and a half ago, we had a reunion of state senators in the state of Ohio. There are about 150 living members of the state Senate, and about 100 were able to attend. And Ted was there, of course, as not only the longest serving state senator, but he was also the leader of the Senate in the early 1960s. It was important that we recognize him, and he did, and he, of course, was very graceful. And so it was a fine day in the Rotunda today.
Make sure that you check out a lot of the photos that we took from the Rotunda, and also the two videos that we prepared of Ted Gray at the Senate reunion, and not only the one about the Senate reunion where he was honored by former President Niehaus and current President Huffman, but also where he got out on the atrium floor and told a little story, of course. And it really was a touching moment, and it's very well worth taking a look at that. You can find that on ohiosenate.gov. Go over to news, click on that, and you'll see On the Record, and you'll be able to see those photos also on our social media on Facebook as well. You have to tell the story that you told, though, at the Rotunda to the family that former Governor John Kasich told you about Ted Gray.
So, Governor, I was on the phone with Governor Kasich about a policy issue on my drive down, and Governor Kasich told the story to the family today. He was a young and new senator and wanted to give the Republican caucus his opinion about something. Ted had been in the Senate for 3.5 decades at that point, and Governor got up and as a senator and gave what for to the rest of the caucus about his opinion, sat down, and Senator Gray got the floor, and he looked it over at Governor Kasich, and he said, we need more mustard for that hot dog. I don't think Governor Kasich would mind me telling that story, because he got a good chuckle out of it, and it helped him, recognize that to take advantage of folks who had been around a long time in a particular job. That sort of it's knowledge, and if the knowledge is used well enough, then it turns into wisdom. And with Ted, you had that.
Yeah, 43 years, 1951 to 1994, and you bring up that word knowledge. A lot of the institutional knowledge disappeared not too long after term limits were passed in 1992, 2 years before 1994 when Ted Gray retired. Is there a lack of institutional knowledge based on term limits, and what should people know about that? I mean, I understand why people voted for it, because it's one of those, seems like that's a no-brainer at the ballot box, but much like any industry, whether it's newsrooms and younger newsrooms with no experience and no historical knowledge about how to cover politics or local government or state government, it does make a difference in how things get done.
Yeah, so I think people should first step back and understand under our Constitution the concept of balance of power. You have the judiciary, the legislative branch, and the executive branch. And when you weaken one of those branches, it obviously affects that balance of power. Roosevelt tried to pack the court and weaken the United States Supreme Court. And of course, legislatures are always trying to inhibit what the executive branch is doing and vice versa. What this essentially has done is weaken the legislative branch, and the bureaucracy, the executive branch, has basically superseded in many ways the functions of the elected members of the legislative branch. And the reason is they know more. If someone is in the job in the bureaucracy for 30 years, they're going to know the hidden things, the pitfalls and not. If you're here for 2 years, you don't know very much. After 4 years, you're beginning to understand it. But if you're out after 8 years, what you learned in 8 years, somebody's starting over. So, I mean, ask yourself if the only people you want flying your airplane are the people who've only been a pilot for 8 years and then they have to leave. Of course, all those folks have been in the Air Force or something like that for 20 years before they start flying commercially. So it's a big problem right now. I've been in the legislature 16 years. There's probably half a dozen people or longer than that. But on average, about a quarter of the legislature turns over every 2 years. And that's a difficult problem.
But there's also an art to getting something done, to making a deal. And I think the book is called Getting to Yes. And when you're talking about two chambers with 132 members, there needs to be somebody there that knows how to negotiate and get things done, because it's not just getting two sides to agree. Sometimes there's disagreement within your own party or within your own caucus.
Well, you said a mouthful there, John. I mean, yeah, it's you know, I kind of look at, I have my 80% rule. This is my own rule I made up. You know, 80% of the people agree on 80% of things 80% of the time. And if you multiply all of those out, I think it adds up to about 51% or something like that. And if what you're trying to do is get most things worked out, 80% of the things, which are generally the most important things, then you really can work them out. Now, you can't insult the other person first and then get them to try to agree to them, or I'm not going to listen to anything you have to say. You don't have to agree with it, but at least listen to them. Those are all standard things, and it's not just a matter of politics or government. That's true in any aspect of life, whether it's your marriage, your family, your workmates, your buddies, going to the store and trying to return an item, buying a car, whatever it is. The discourse back and forth with people initially determines how successful you are going to be. Now, we are always going to have complex, often bitterly contested issues. And being able to do that in a professional way helps you get them done, and at least doesn't destroy a lot of the relationships that you have. And you know, people who've been doing it longer are better at it. It's like anything else, you know, cutting diamonds, playing baseball, you know, tuning pianos, whatever it may be.
You know, and with that in mind, your time as a member of the bar, as a lawyer, certainly that goes a long way to understanding how to negotiate. And it is the legislative branch that writes the law. You would think that it does help to understand how to write a bill, having a background in the law. What is the current state, though, of, I guess, the legal profession? Is there a need for lawyers? Because maybe things have changed since you first became a lawyer versus today. I guess, what is your message about whether it applies to public policy or people that are thinking about, you know, I'd like to go to law school, but I don't know if I can afford it?
I think there's a few things. First of all, lawyers are effective as legislators for two reasons. One is, usually in their practice, they have to deal with multiple issues, and they have to learn to think critically and discuss things critically, and sometimes tell people things they don't want to hear. And better lawyers are better at doing that without offending the other person. So there's that aspect, just sort of the how you learn to practice law. Part of what we do also is examine the meanings of words, and we often, we look at language and we say that's not what that means, what's written down there. Now we have staff, we have the Legislative Service Commission, things like that. But often lawyers are able to make sure that the ideas that are being communicated are effectively put down on paper and argued effectively also. And when I say argued, I mean convey the message of what we're trying to accomplish in a particular moment. Unfortunately, now we have record low numbers of people attending law school. That's really directly attributable to the high cost of college. When the federal government took over the student loan business and everybody could get a student loan no matter what, well, of course, colleges raised their tuition. And it's not, you can't say college is more affordable because you can borrow money to pay for it. It means you couldn't afford to go. And certainly if you can't pay it back within a short period of time. So we have fewer people going to law school, thus we have fewer lawyers. And that's not just bad for the legislature, it's bad for the public because there's just less access to a lawyer. And a lot of lawyers, they sort of have a couple paths. They can go to work for a government because it's kind of a steady job. They go to work for a big firm and because it's good paying, but that's not servicing most of the public because that's not where most of the public gets their lawyers. So the lawyers who are servicing most of the public, there are fewer and fewer of those. Now, that's not really a legislative problem, although we've tried to do some things to address it. The Chief Justice Kennedy has done some great work, as has the Ohio State Bar Association. We think of things like student loans, isn't this wonderful? Everybody has access to this going to college. We don't think about the consequences of that, and what ultimately it means is, well, ultimately now fewer people are going to college, and one of it is because of the cost, because of the loans, and oh, by the way, there's a whole community of underprivileged people who don't have access to justice.
Yeah, and if you live in rural Ohio, like where I grew up, and you need simple help on a family matter, you need a power of attorney, financial power of attorney, you need a will written, or something needs changed, you need to be able to find somebody at a law firm who knows what they're doing and that you can have confidence that they've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, every day in our law firm in Lima, Ohio, there are calls, there are people walking in, they live in Arizona, their mom died, something needs to happen with the house, but their sister isn't agreeing, what do we do? Or, their son got picked up for underage alcohol, or they need to sell their business, they need to buy a business, on and on and on. And those are the kind of problems that you need to take care of.
Or they want to adopt a child.
Or they want to adopt a child. We do a lot of that also.
In fact, speaking of adoption, in the last budget, in the current budget that we passed in '23, the adoption program was changed from a tax credit program to the adoption grant program. And there's 3 different levels to it. The first level is the base adoption grant for $10,000. That's your base adoption that would go to a family. But for a family that would like to open their home to a foster child, the grant would be $15,000. And to adopt a child with disabilities, it would be $20,000. This program has been so popular and has made such a great difference that in Gongwer, which covers the Statehouse, they broke it down that 326 grants have been given to adopt foster children, 255 grants to adopt children with disabilities, and 185 for the base adoption grant. So this program basically was almost out of money, and in the most recent session, the Senate provided an additional $38 million into the program.
Yeah. So I I don't do a lot of adoptions these days. One of the lawyers in my office do. But, you know, it's often that the tax credit program was pretty clunky. And, you know, if you were a person who couldn't take advantage of income tax credits, it didn't help you. But if we think about the ability to, for example, a foster child who's adopted is now a child, is now a family member, what that does for the foster child in terms of their life, you know, I think everybody, that can't be overstated. All of the benefits to that child and frankly the benefits to the state, because if, you know, the foster children, there's cost to that, and there's a lot of other great things that are going to, or bad things that aren't going to happen. And so this $15,000 is for a parent, frankly, it probably should be a lot more than that. So when we heard that program, because of its success and what we initially anticipated need more money, we, in our last session, authorized what we thought would get us through this next General Assembly to allow people to continue to adopt in all three of these categories. So we put that in a bill, along with some fundamental funding that needed to be passed to continue school construction and other public works construction, as well as some money for the state fair. So we're hoping the House acts on that, especially even if the House doesn't want to act on the public works part of it, at least move this adoption thing forward so that these folks will be able to continue these adoptions.
Yeah, it was an amendment into House Bill 27. Gongwer quoted me correctly in the story. He said, my quote was, "We want to back parents who want to open their homes and their hearts to children who need help. So we want to refund the program." In other words, reinvest in the program. And the comment from the House Finance Chairman was, "Adoption is extremely important, but where that money comes from will ultimately be a point of discussion as we look at other priorities." I would hope that foster children would be a priority of the House.
Yeah, I don't really understand that sentence. I mean, where that money comes from is from the General Revenue Fund from the state of Ohio. So, you know, I think all of the other stuff aside, we at least ought to move forward on that expeditiously.
You know, speaking of transforming it from a tax credit program to a grant program, it is tax season after all. Pretty soon, it'll be April 15th. But Ohioans should be, I think, confident when they go to have their taxes prepared that the number of overall tax brackets since you've been in the General Assembly has dramatically dropped from around 9 down to 2.
Yeah, it's really a better tax system. Now, of course, a flat tax would be better than 2, but going from 9 to 2 has really helped people plan. You know, the other thing, of course, is we have the business income deduction on business income up to $300,000 a year. And so if you look at any small business, you know, whether it's a print shop, a little restaurant, you know, the things that those multiple businesses that are really the foundation of our state's economy. Certainly the Intels and Ford and General Dynamics, Procter & Gamble, those big employers are important. But one of those big employers could go out and it is devastating, but there are still thousands and thousands of small businesses that will always going to be here. So they can take advantage of the business income deduction. And because of the other change that we made in the budget, where we really raised the exemption for the commercial activity tax, which essentially eliminated that commercial activity tax, which replaced a corporate tax, for about 90% of the businesses. So if you're a small business person in Ohio, and you're making under $300,000 a year, you're not paying income tax and you're not paying commercial activity tax or corporate tax. It's a great place to do business. And I think it's helped in a lot of our towns and neighborhoods, not just small towns, you know, right here in Franklin County, for those folks to be able to, you know, take advantage of that and thrive.
Small business is the backbone, really, of any economy, state to state. And not only for small business, but also for maybe students, people trying to work maybe part-time or trying to get to the next step or start their career, up to $26,000, I think $500, there is no state income tax.
Right, and so that amount, which has changed through the years, it basically reflects the fact that, you know, if you're making $26,000 a year, and these would be employees, whether they're direct business income or not, if you're making less than that, you don't pay any income tax, and it basically reflects that at some point, all the money you got, you need. Now, of course, any non-paying sector of the public, other folks in the public necessarily are paying more. And I think what we're trying ultimately to do, I think most tax policy is, one, tax policy shouldn't affect behavior. It shouldn't cause people to stop buying something or start buying something. And it also obviously needs to produce revenue. So you want people doing what they're always going to do and producing revenue. As has been shown throughout economic history, low tax rates produce more revenue. And in the moment, people want to raise taxes to pay for what they want while they're in office, but over a period of time, low rates produce more revenue and ultimately may help you lower rates further as you go along.
It encourages ambition.
Well, right. You know, I always say the income tax is a tax that taxes your effort. The harder you work, the more you pay. And you know, you're tending bar and making money, and you want to get an extra job to put your kid through college, and so you start driving a cab, and the gift from the government is you get to pay more income tax.
You get to pay it all back,
yeah.
Right? All the part-time income goes back. Well, we talked about tax day is April 15th, but election day next week, March 19th. There was a very interesting national column written in the Daily Caller, and it was written by a gentleman who actually testified on behalf of Senate Bill 215. He's the executive director of Honest Elections Project. His name is Jason Sneed, and it gets back to Senate Bill 215, which Senator McCauley, of course, was on the podcast 2 weeks ago talking about the importance of this and how dollars coming in from outside the United States are trying to influence the outcome of public policy in Republican-controlled states. And I just want you to briefly listen to a couple sentences out of this. Since 2017, the 1630 Fund has spent almost $80 million to influence 33 ballot measures in 18 states. 1630 has concentrated most of its largest contributions on voting measures. The group spent $3.5 million fighting voter ID in North Carolina. We, of course, just passed voter ID in Ohio. In Michigan, 1630 spent $6 million to take redistricting powers away from the Republican-controlled legislature, then followed up with over $11 million to enshrine a left-wing rewrite of Michigan's voting laws in the state's constitution, a 1-2 punch that helped turn the state blue. And now the foreign-funded left has its sights fixed on Ohio. 1630 poured more than $10 million into ballot measures last year and is already one of the largest donors to a Michigan-style independent redistricting measure headed for the ballot this November, if they get the signatures. Left-wing election lawyer Mark Elias, who has represented Hans-Jörg Weiss, who has been the main contributor to the 1630 Fund, he is a Swiss billionaire, is suing in the Ohio Supreme Court to advance yet another measure rewriting the Buckeye State's voting laws. That initiative is so extreme that it even reopens the door to non-citizen voting, something Ohioans just voted to ban in the state constitution. How dangerous is this out-of-the-country effort to Ohioans and Ohio law?
Yeah, well, folks will get a chance to vote on this redistricting amendment as it's coming in November. If you remember in 2011, the reason that people are upset is there were no rules regarding compact districts, dividing communities, splitting townships and villages and cities and counties, elongated districts, cracking and packing of communities of interest, whether it's ethnic or racial. All of those things were a problem. Republicans and Democrats got together in 2015, drafted an amendment that addressed all of that. And then we campaigned together. Vern Sykes and I were the campaign co-chairs.
Democrat senator.
That is correct. And we were both out of the legislature at the time. And we campaigned together. Both parties endorsed that, and it passed overwhelmingly. And when that was allowed to work in 2023, it produced a bipartisan, unanimous vote for a new map. Now, in 2021, Chief Justice O'Connor and 3 colleagues intervened, had a whole series of orders would ultimately prove to be unconstitutional. And those are things that's what happens when the judiciary decides they're going to insert themselves in the process. Even when, by the way, the Constitution says the Supreme Court shall not draw a map. So more of that later as we go along. But as it relates to the other ballot initiative, one of the provisions of that allows an individual to show up on election day, register, vote, and sign an affidavit that they're an eligible voter, and then walk away and you must count their vote. Whether they have an address, never seen the person, don't know anything about it. So essentially, that process is for us to take whoever it is that we can get and get them in and get them to start voting. There will be no election security whatsoever if that passes. So between that and what the Swiss billionaire is trying to do with redistricting and what Maureen O'Connor is trying to do, we're essentially going to eliminate public input into this. Elected officials who are elected by people to make these decisions will be removed.
And what we just learned in Michigan was their so-called citizen panel that does all the redistricting was swatted very strongly by a federal court that said, oh, no, you just violated the Voting Rights Act with these strangely drawn districts where you pulled the black vote out of many of the urban areas, pulling them in, stretching the district out into the suburbs. And so therefore you have disenfranchised not only black voters, but did the same thing that you had warned about. The result will be fewer members who are minorities of state legislatures.
Yeah, that will be the result. And for folks who doubt that, go see what the redistricting, the Citizens Redistricting Commission, whatever they call, in Michigan did, and look at the federal court case where they said that violates the Civil Rights Act. So the strategy really is to create pinwheel districts that start in inner cities and go out to suburbs. And the people who are going to be elected in those districts are not going to be African Americans who or in many ways are social conservatives and conservatives in other ways, but still Democrats. You'll have far left progressive folks elected. And they're also going to eliminate moderate Republican legislators. And so this, in fact, will polarize. It will not make voters more moderate. That's not the intent of this. The intent of this is to elect far left progressives to the Ohio legislature. And so, there's a number of other problems with, one of which is the ballot board, which is appointed by other people, is going to appoint 4 judges who are going to select from 90 people, 45 other people who are appointed, who will then pick somebody to draw a map. It's so completely removed from the vote of the people, it's really just a star chamber. And they have one thing in mind, and that's a far left progressive vote. The same people who are backing this are the people who put up a 30-year-old to run against a veteran prosecutor in Cuyahoga County, a Democrat named Mike O'Malley. Different party than me, but a prosecutor who knew what he was doing, and they're trying to put this person up because they're going to have these far left principles like letting criminals out of jail. So O'Malley probably doesn't need me to tell and hope that he gets reelected, but I do, because I like to go to Cleveland. I like to feel safe in downtown Cleveland.
Well, that certainly has been the headline, even if today's left-leaning national media doesn't want to report it. But let's face it, thousands upon thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are not American citizens are crossing the border right now. You can call them illegal aliens, whatever the, politically correct migrant term, but still, you can almost connect the dots on this, that when this foreign money from the 1630 group, from a billionaire overseas in Switzerland, is funding these kinds of efforts, that is being coordinated by the NDRC's main lawyer, the National Democratic Redistricting Commission, that tried to sue and stall the process of redistricting that we saw in 21 and 22. It's almost like they want people who can't prove that they are not only a registered voter in the state of Ohio and Ohio citizen, but also not a member of the United States, not a United States citizen, just to let them vote. And is this used to be something that people would say, oh, that's just a big conspiracy theory. But I'm not so sure that's the case anymore.
Well, yeah, I mean, the question about conspiracies usually comes down to, well, what are the elements that could be true if, in fact, you want to make a conclusion that something is happening? And, whether you think you saw a flying saucer, whatever you think, who shot John F. Kennedy, all of those things. What we can say here is there's an effort in Ohio to make it easier for non-citizens to vote, because someone can walk in, no proof, no address, and they can vote under what they're trying to do. We know that's true. We also know that there are record numbers of people passing through the border. It's completely out of control. Now Democrats are agreeing with that. So we know that's true. We also know that Ohio is the biggest, richest state that allows changes to our Constitution with only a 50% plus one change. We know that's true, okay? So all of these things are true. Could this be happening? Well, of course it could be happening, because all these things are true. So, it's like someone can say, well, it hasn't happened yet. Wait until I plunge the knife into you before you really know I'm trying to murder you. Well, I don't think we have to wait for that.
Yeah. Ohioans spoke loudly in 2015 and 2018 with Article 11 and Article 19 of the redistricting process. More than 70% of the voters supported that. Ohioans also spoke loudly in one of the most recent elections, saying you need to be a resident of the state of Ohio and a resident of the United States to vote in the state of Ohio. Yet that doesn't seem to matter to well-funded billionaires who are willing to go, well, let's just change the whole law in the state of Ohio.
Yeah, well, well-funded billionaires usually don't have to live with the results of the things that they're funding. We had this provision up in Cleveland where essentially, a large percentage of the budget would get turned over to essentially a non-elected citizens commission, with no restrictions on how they would spend it, determining by 16-year-olds. Republicans and Democrats, although we agree on a lot, we also disagree a lot, but we also know that for the most part, things that happen at the municipal level, everybody wants safe streets, everybody wants the water to work, and the storm, and the sanitary sewers, and the snows, the streets plowed, all of those things. That's all fundamental stuff. And that's what cities are supposed to do. They have local issues. Turning a lot of that money over, which is what these folks in Cleveland tried to do, takes money out of the city's coffers to pay for police and snowplow drivers and firemen and all of those folks. I'm glad they defeated it. But that's the kind of thing that we're thinking about, is we're turning money over to folks who have a completely political agenda.
Ohio Senate President Matt Huffman, thanks for talking with us today.
Good to be with you again, John. Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.